I used to think trust was the foundation of love, the invisible glue that held two people together, even when the storms of life tried to pull them apart. But I learned in the harshest way that sometimes the word trust can be twisted, weaponized, used as a shield to hide intentions that have nothing to do with love. My name is Marissa. I'm 27, and this is the story of how the man I was supposed to marry turned trust into a trap, and how I clawed my way out of it before it destroyed me. When Nolan proposed 6 months ago, I thought my life had finally settled into place. I wasn't the type who needed a fairy tale, but I believed in building something steady, something real. He slid the ring on my finger with tears in his eyes, and for a while I allowed myself to believe we were aligned. We planned a modest wedding, something intimate, just close friends and family. Nothing extravagant, nothing performative, just love. At least that's what I thought. It was 3 weeks ago when the first crack appeared. We were at dinner, the scent of roasted chicken filling the air, when he cleared his throat and said he had been talking to his lawyer. He wanted a prenup. He explained gently, just to protect his premarital assets, his investments, and any inheritance down the road. He promised everything earned during marriage would be split 50-50. It's standard, he said, trying to sound calm, but his eyes searched mine as though bracing for impact, and impact came. My fork froze in midair. A prenup. With all my heart, I wanted to hear it as logic, but all my wounds screamed betrayal. "You should trust me," I told him, my voice trembling. The conversation spiraled. He said it wasn't about love, it was just planning. I heard only accusation, suspicion, the shadow of gold digger painted across my skin. I cried. He backtracked, but the wound had been cut. For days after, we lived in silence, edged with unease. I kept asking myself why he needed a contract to bind what was supposed to be bound by love. But then came the moment that turned everything upside down. He came home smiling, almost relieved, and told me he didn't need the prenup anymore. My heart leapt with joy. I threw my arms around him, kissing him, whispering, "I knew you'd understand." But joy lasts only a moment before it curdles into dread. Because then he added, as casually as someone remarking on the weather, that he had transferred all his assets into his mother's name. The condo, the investments, the accounts, all of it. The floor gave out beneath me. "You did what I asked," my voice cracking. He repeated it calm as ever, saying it was for estate planning tax benefits, that it didn't change anything between us. But it did. It changed everything. That was our future. That was the home where I pictured our children laughing. That was the security we were supposed to share. He looked me in the eye and asked, "Why does it matter if you love me? Why does it matter?" I left that night, shaking. My heart felt shredded, my mind a blur of rage and fear. He thought he had proven something, that he had set a test of love. But to me, it was betrayal. It was a secret shift of power, a maneuver that turned partnership into dependence. I wish I could say I walked away then. But betrayal is sticky. It clings, it confuses, it whispers doubts into your ear. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was right. Maybe it didn't matter. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every laugh we'd shared, every plan we'd made. And then the letter came. A lawyer's letter, cold, clinical, demanding he reverse the transfers, disclose all his holdings, compensate me for emotional damages. Words I never imagined seeing tied to my name. I hadn't written it. My friend had panicked on my behalf, but when Nolan read it all, he saw was proof of his paranoia. Proof that I was the villain. And suddenly I was both the betrayed and the accused. That's when I realized trust isn't about contracts or signatures. Trust is about transparency. And Nolan's version of trust had nothing to do with honesty. It had everything to do with control. The days that followed felt like living in a fog laced with glass. Every movement cut me. Every breath carried shards of doubt. Nolan and I tried to talk, but our words ricocheted like bullets in a closed room. He insisted I was twisting everything, that transferring assets to his mother was just smart financial planning, that it had nothing to do with me. But that was the point, it had everything to do with me. Because marriage is supposed to be about us, not me. versus you. I remember sitting at the edge of our bed, my engagement ring heavy on my finger, staring at my reflection in the mirror across the room. My eyes looked hollow, my skin pale, as though I had aged years in a matter of weeks. I thought about my parents' marriage, how my mother always said a relationship is built brick by brick, but it only takes one hammer swing to shatter the wall. I was starting to realize Nolan's hammer swing wasn't the prenup. It was the secrecy, the way he maneuvered behind my back, smiling in my face while stacking the deck against me. Then came the dinner with his family. I didn't want to go, but he insisted it would ease the tension. "They'll help you understand," he said. Reluctantly, I agreed. His mother greeted me with a tight smile, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't place. Over roasted lamb and red wine, the conversation turned sharp. She leaned across the table, her voice dripping with condescension. "Marriage is about trust, dear. If you really trusted Nolan, you wouldn't care whose name is on a deed." The room spun. Her words weren't casual, they were calculated. Suddenly I understood. She wasn't just holding his assets, she was holding me at arm's length, ensuring that no matter what vows were spoken, I would never truly belong. It was betrayal wrapped in etiquette, served on fine china. That night I broke down in the bathroom, muffling my sobs with a towel so Nolan wouldn't hear. But of course he heard. And instead of comfort, he gave me a lecture. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his tone cold. "Why can't you just trust me?" Trust. The word felt like poison by then. I confided in my best friend Lena. She listened, her eyes wide with disbelief, and finally asked the question I had been too afraid to face. "Marissa, are you sure he ever wanted a partner? Or just someone to play the role he wrote?" Her words pierced through me like lightning. For the first time I allowed myself to admit the possibility that Nolan never saw me as an equal. Maybe I was just a placeholder, a pretty ornament to fit neatly beside him while he kept all the power in his pocket. 2 nights later, I found something that confirmed my darkest fears. Nolan had left his laptop open, an email still on the screen. It was from his lawyer congratulating him on protecting family assets from potential marital claims. My name wasn't even in the email, just the phrase "potential marital claims," as if I were a threat, not the woman he asked to spend forever with him. My chest clenched. I wanted to throw the laptop, to scream, to shake him awake and demand answers. Instead, I quietly closed it and sat in the dark, tears streaking my face, realizing I was engaged to a man who already saw me as an adversary. But the deepest wound came later. At brunch with a mutual friend, I overheard a story I wasn't meant to hear. Nolan had joked about how if things didn't work out, at least he wouldn't lose anything. He laughed as if my love, my devotion, my very life tied to his were nothing more than a gamble he'd rigged to win. In that moment, something inside me hardened. Rage, yes, but also clarity. I had been clinging to the image of us, the dream of vows, the idea that we were building something sacred. But dreams can be prisons when they're built on lies. And I knew then that if I stayed silent, if I let him dictate the terms of love, I would lose myself entirely. The morning after hearing that cruel joke about me, I woke up with a strange calm. It wasn't peace, not yet, but something steadier than rage, something clearer than grief. I stood in front of the mirror, slipped the engagement ring off my finger, and set it on the dresser. The indentation it left on my skin felt like a brand, a reminder of how much I had given to someone who had already built a fortress to keep me out. That day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg Nolan for love, and I wasn't going to prove my worth to his family. Instead, I would protect myself the way he had so ruthlessly protected himself. But my protection wouldn't be hidden in contracts and transfers. It would be in reclaiming my voice, my boundaries, and my truth. I started quietly. I opened a new bank account in my name alone, redirecting my paycheck so he no longer had access. I spoke to a lawyer, not Denise this time, but someone Lena recommended, who specialized in family law. I laid out everything: the prenup argument, the asset transfers, the email calling me a potential marital claim. The lawyer listened carefully and said words I hadn't expected to hear. "This isn't just betrayal, Marissa. This is strategy. He's planning for a fight you don't even know you're in." Her words chilled me, but they also fueled me. Because if Nolan saw me as an opponent, then I had to stop pretending we were on the same team. The unraveling quickened from there. Nolan's behavior grew more erratic, as though he sensed the shift in me. He asked why I was quieter, why I wasn't planning the wedding with the same enthusiasm. I told him the truth. Because I don't know if I'm marrying the man I thought you were. His eyes hardened. His jaw clenched, and for the first time he didn't even bother to deny it. Instead he muttered, "Maybe you were never the woman I thought you'd be either." It was like watching a mask slip. Then came the family dinner that sealed everything. His mother brought out a folder, yes, an actual folder during dessert. Inside were documents she wanted me to sign. "Just acknowledgements," she said smoothly, "to confirm you understand the assets are separate." Nolan sat beside her silent, his hand resting lightly on her chair, like he was a soldier standing at attention for his general. I looked at the papers, then at both of them. And in that moment my heartbreak turned to something sharper. Betrayal, yes, but also defiance. I pushed the folder back across the table and said, "If this is what love looks like to you, then I don't want it." His mother's face flushed crimson. Nolan's eyes went wide as if he hadn't imagined I'd ever push back. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound rang hollow. The rest of the dinner was a blur of tension and thinly veiled hostility. That night, after they went to bed, I packed a bag. Just the essentials: clothes, my laptop, the photo of my mom and me from years ago that I kept on my nightstand. I slipped the engagement ring into an envelope and wrote 5 words on the outside: "Trust is not control." Then I left it on the kitchen counter and walked out. I didn't have a plan beyond survival, but in that moment, leaving was both the hardest and the most liberating choice I had ever made. The air outside felt colder but cleaner, like I was finally breathing after months underwater. The fallout came swiftly. Nolan bombarded me with texts alternating between begging me to come back and accusing me of betrayal. His mother sent emails filled with venom, painting me as ungrateful, manipulative, disloyal. But for once I didn't respond. Silence became my weapon. Instead, I poured my energy into rebuilding. I stayed with Lena for a while, leaning on her kindness, reminding myself that family isn't always blood or legal ties, it's the people who stand by you when the world tilts sideways. I started therapy, peeling back the layers of pain and shame, learning to recognize the difference between love and control, between trust and manipulation. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to stitch myself back together. But the story wasn't over yet. Because betrayal doesn't just walk away quietly, it tries to pull you back into its shadow. It didn't take long before the shadow came clawing at my door. A month after I left, I received a letter, thick, formal, stamped with the name of Nolan's family lawyer. My hands trembled as I opened it, half expecting it to be some absurd demand. And it was. They accused me of financial manipulation during the engagement, claiming I had pressured Nolan emotionally and deserved no reimbursement for anything I had spent. They demanded I return gifts, including the ring I had already left behind. Reading those words, my chest burned with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. I hadn't taken a cent from Nolan. I had paid for parts of the wedding deposits myself, sunk my savings into a dream that evaporated, and walked away with nothing. Now they wanted to strip me of even the dignity of leaving quietly. I called Lena, my voice shaking. "They're trying to ruin me," I whispered. "No," she said firmly. "They're trying to scare you. But you don't scare easily anymore, Marissa, remember that." So I gathered everything: receipts of deposits I had made, text messages where Nolan thanked me for covering expenses, screenshots of our joint planning notes where I was the one paying up front. I gave it all to my lawyer, who read through the stack with a grim smile. "We'll not only fight this," she said, "we'll expose them for what they're doing." Court was a nightmare, but also an awakening. Nolan sat there in his tailored suit, looking wounded, while his mother whispered in his ear like a puppeteer. They painted me as opportunistic, disloyal, greedy. But when my lawyer presented the evidence, the bank statements, the timelines, even the envelope with my ring and note, something shifted in the room. The judge studied these papers, then studied me. "It appears to this court that the petitioner acted transparently throughout the engagement," she said evenly, while the respondent took steps to conceal assets. "This claim is dismissed." Nolan's mother gasped, her composure cracking for the first time. Nolan lowered his gaze, shame flickering across his face like a shadow he couldn't quite shake off. I walked out of that courthouse taller than I had entered. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving their schemes, I was defeating them. But the real victory wasn't in the dismissal, it was in what came after. I realized I didn't need Nolan's apology or his family's acknowledgement or even society's validation. What I needed was to reclaim myself, to write a story where betrayal wasn't the final word. I threw myself into work, but also into living. I redecorated my apartment, painting the walls a warm shade of sage. I signed up for a pottery class, letting clay spin and reshape beneath my hands. I started journaling again, pouring my grief and rage onto paper until the ink felt lighter. Slowly, the woman I had been before Nolan, the dreamer, the fighter, the believer in love, began to reappear. And yet there were nights when the silence still echoed too loudly. When I lay awake wondering how a man who once kissed my forehead so tenderly could betray me so thoroughly. Those nights hurt, but they also reminded me that wounds take time. Healing isn't a straight line, it's a spiral, revisiting the pain until it loses its grip. The twist came one evening when I ran into a mutual acquaintance at a cafe. She leaned close and whispered, "You know Nolan's mother? She did the same thing to his father. Transferred everything into her name. Left him with nothing when they divorced." The words hit me like a thunderclap. Suddenly it all made sense: the paranoia, the control, the obsession with protecting assets. Nolan wasn't just repeating his mother's tactics. He was living in the shadow of her betrayal, trained to believe love was war and partners were threats. It didn't excuse him, but it explained him. And in that explanation I found closure. Because I realized his betrayal wasn't truly about me. It was about the legacy of fear he had inherited and chosen to pass on. I simply refused to carry it forward. When I walked out of that cafe, the air felt different, like a window had cracked open in a room I didn't realize was suffocating me. For months I had carried the weight of Nolan's betrayal as though it were proof of my unworthiness. But now I understood it was never about me. It was about the cycle he refused to break, the poison his mother had passed down that he chose to serve to me. Realizing that gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. I went home that night and sat with my journal, the pages already crowded with entries of anger and sorrow. For the first time, I wrote with a steady hand, not shaking with rage. I wrote, "I am not his mother's story. I am not his pawn. I am not defined by what he feared." And when I set the pen down, I felt lighter, as though the ink itself had pulled the toxins out of me. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still whispers, mutual acquaintances who didn't know the whole story. People who preferred drama over truth. Sometimes I heard Nolan's name in passing, followed by rumors of him struggling in business, of fights with his mother, of relationships that never lasted beyond a few months. Each time I felt a pang, not of longing but of recognition. He was still trapped in the cage he built, still serving a sentence I had escaped. And I had escaped. I built something new from the ashes. My pottery class became more than a hobby, it became a sanctuary. My hands, once clenched with rage, now shaped bowls and vases, imperfect but beautiful. I sold a few pieces at a local market, and strangers smiled as they held them, admiring what I had created. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. Proof that from broken clay something whole could emerge. One evening after a long day at the studio, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Nolan. My breath caught as I opened it, half expecting venom, but instead the words were desperate, almost pitiful. He wrote that he regretted how things ended, that he felt trapped by his family's expectations, that he still loved me, and wished we could start over. I read it twice, then set it down. There was a time when that letter would have undone me, when I would have clung to every apology, dissected every phrase for hope. But now all I felt was distance. His words were still tangled in excuses, still drenched in the same poison he had chosen before. He wasn't asking me to build a future, he was asking me to step back into his cage. I didn't reply. I folded the letter, placed it in my journal, and wrote beneath it, "I deserve a love that doesn't come with conditions. I deserve a love that doesn't feel like survival." Months later, on a warm spring afternoon, I stood in front of a kiln at the pottery studio. My latest piece, a large vase, had just finished firing. As I lifted it out, the sunlight caught its glazed surface, and I saw my reflection in it, not broken, not hollow, but whole, strong, unapologetically mine. For the first time since the engagement, I realized I wasn't waiting for closure anymore. I had already created it. I didn't need Nolan's apology, his family's acceptance, or anyone else's validation. My life was no longer a courtroom, no longer a battlefield. It was a canvas, and I held the brush. If you're watching this, maybe you've been where I was, betrayed by someone you trusted, forced to question your worth, left carrying wounds that weren't yours to begin with. If so, let me tell you this. You are not their story. You are not their fear. You are not their inheritance of betrayal. You can choose to break the cycle. You can choose to walk away. And you can choose to build something beautiful from the ruins they left behind. So this is my ending. Not the wedding I once imagined, not the partnership I once begged for, but something better. My ending is freedom. My ending is creation. My ending is me, whole and unbroken, standing tall in the sunlight of my own life. If my story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength, or gave you a little more courage to walk away from someone who doesn't honor you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe for more stories told from the heart. And if you faced your own betrayal, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear how you found your freedom.